Chapter 0, Prologue. Of history was divided into 4 periods. The first was called the Dawn. The Av were described as components of the interstellar ships they were engineered for, and they themselves meekly believed it. Their purpose in life was determined from the outset, and so they were never compelled to make tough decisions or tormented by the doubts others faced. In the eyes of those who enjoy irony, this was when the Av were at their happiest. The second was the Age of Independence. The Av ceased to think of themselves as mere biodroids and took up the banner of revolt against their mother city. They vowed to live for the sake of their race and destroyed that metropolis. It was a harsh and bitter age, impelled as they were by the presentiment they would be wiped out as a people. Yet it was also romanticized by those who are partial to the legends. The third was the Space Roving Age. This was when the Av flew the city ship Avriel across the stars, wandering without any goal or objective in mind. Many ardently assert that this was the golden age of Avkind. The fourth was the Imperial Age. The race that had begun as components of interstellar ships then flew their own ships, spread across the galaxy, and established an empire without parallel in all of human history. It was the present age. If one were to demarcate the Imperial Age further, its first period would have to be called the Age of Expansion. By wielding planar space navigation, they conquered worlds still bound by the speed of light barrier one after another. They also mercilessly smashed other interstellar powers that had expanded through planar space and swallowed them up in the form of their constituent star systems. In the end, the galaxy was left with 5 major powers: the Humankind Empire of Av, the United Humankind, the Hania Federation, the People's Sovereign Stellar Union, and the Greater Alkant Republic. Not long after, the 4 nations aside from the Empire formed an alliance, imposing constraints on the expansion of the Av sphere of influence. One could call this the Age of Stability. Humanity was now divided into 2 great powers. The Empire, thinking a large-scale war would not erupt for the time being, merely conquered any isolated worlds it chanced upon. But the Av were the only ones who'd lost any sense of tension and misjudged the situation as stable, for it seemed the other 4 nations were assiduously preparing for war. As soon as the enemy had judged their preparations complete, that false stability crumbled, and the most momentous war in human history came to be. The Hania Federation was alone among the known powers not to enter the fray, but they too became involved eventually. Now that 10 years had passed since the fall of the imperial capital of Lokfakar, they were living in what should be called the Lost Capital Age. The optimists among the Av saw this as the midpoint of what was sure to be an imperial age so interminably long that historians would tire of it. Once this brief anomaly was over, the Av emperor would consolidate and rule over all human societies, and then the true imperial age would be at hand. They were convinced that, unless the varied multitude of worlds were administered by Av hands, the whole of humanity would never know happiness. The pessimists, on the other hand, believed the empire would end when the Lost Capital Age did. In other words, they forecasted the fall of the Humankind Empire of Av. And as such, they bemoaned the future that would befall the galaxy, for they agreed with the optimists as to what was necessary for humanity to be happy. Cats, meanwhile, were neither optimistic nor pessimistic. They worried not what future might befall them, nor did they yearn for a bygone era. So long as the present afforded them delicious meals, the appropriate temperature, and a nice, narrow space to hide in when they felt so inclined, that was all that mattered. All the better if that space was blanketed by something comfy and soft. Diaho, a pedigreed of cat, had never experienced dissatisfaction with food or temperature. He didn't even know bad-tasting food or differences in temperature existed. He had led a pampered life, though he had, from time to time, been dragged out of his favorite crevice. He had always dealt with such an outrage with an undaunted demeanor, and this time was no exception. He had been sleeping so snugly, he raised a growl of protest at being so rudely scooped up, his whole body declaring his displeasure. The human who had disrupted his sweet slumber was named Jint. "Come on, Diaho, quit it." Diaho didn't know by what authority this human acted, but he meddled in his affairs with regularity. That being said, there had been no word from him for a while. What a capricious and unmanageable creature. "We've got to move." This is goodbye again, for the time being. I sees, full of energy, uttered the human called Lafier. The female gave off a nostalgic scent, the odor of Daiho's birthplace. He'd been pulled away and brought back to that aroma so many times now. How long would it take, since he was last separated from that place, to be returned anew? He sure is. Even though he's gotta be pretty old for a cat now. As of not too long ago, he's got great-grandkittens. Or is it great-great-grandkittens? And yet he's still squirming like crazy. Daiho didn't understand what the sounds meant, but he could tell by the male's intonation that he was insulting him. They had been together for quite some time, all things considered. Daiho made his scathing reprobation known through a hiss. He's baring his teeth, said Lafier. There. Easy does it. Jint caressed Daiho's throat. Though this human proved truly atrocious at dealing with cats, this behavior of his was acceptable. There were rewards to be had in cooperating. While in his enraptured state, Daiho was stuffed into the carrier. He adored cramped spaces, but did not appreciate the inability to exit freely. He scratched and pawed at the carrier's hatch. It felt very pleasant for some reason. What was initially meant as a show of dissatisfaction became an engrossing claw-sharpening session. Oh yeah, I heard the ship's getting a name change. That made its way to you fast, said Lafier. I mean, I am your adjutant. So, did you decide what to name it? The Klibnikek. The Dragon of Cryb? Jint chuckled. You can be surprisingly assertive when you want to be. Shut up, Jint. Daiho was born in the Imperial Palace, if I recall. I've never been to the Cryb Royal Palace. Now that you mention it, that is true. Honestly though, since we're not heading to the battlefield, is there even a reason to drop the cat off? What are you saying? It may be a training fleet, but there's no knowing if or when it will cross paths with actual combat. So that's why you said, did you know all ships, drop off your cats. I guess since the Ov also live on ships, you need to draw that distinction. Don't make me say it a million times. You're also, yes, your highness, I'm also an Ov. Idiot. Before they knew it, Daiho had grown tired of his sharpening and dozed off.